Well, with that said, let me turn to start the show here and go to Mike Tylick. And Mike, thank you so much for doing this evening. I really do appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome. It's nice to see you again and nice to talk with you. I think tonight I'm going to talk about T-track modules, which is kind of a misnomer because it's actually N scale. But for some reason, it's called T-track, I think, because it's tabletop. And they're very nice modules. I always shied away from module groups just because of the complexity of setting up module railroads that I've seen. It never seemed worth the work. But these are little tabletop things. They're 1 by 2 feet. They're about as heavy as a cafeteria tray. And you put them on the table and plug them together. Now, in this picture, we have a kit. And it's worth buying the kit because the parts have to be very precisely cut because at the very ends of the track are those little Cato plugs. And you can build it yourself, but it's much easier to buy the kit and cheaper. One thing that's happened, I don't want to dwell on the box too much, but the boxes are made with birch plywood, which is becoming difficult to get now with the Russian war. Evidently, the plywood comes from Russia or came from Russia, but you can still get kits. Here's the beginnings of one of the kits. One of the modules I started building. I like this particular box because you notice the tabletop is recessed an inch. That actually gives you some depth below the track, which is one thing I never did like about modules, having the flat top. It just seemed you always tried to somehow get below it. And I cut out a little, but let's go on to the next slide because I don't want to dwell with pictures. And here we go. This is some construction of one of the modules. You can see how I kind of build them up because there is a tabletop. This one did have the top on front. By the way, the modules go together very easily. And I tried to somehow break up the box. So I cut out a little recess in the foreground, and there's a culvert, there's track. The roads are falling in place. I like to build up depth, and you don't have much room, so I just kind of use pieces of foam core, or pieces of whatever. That cobblestone road is some old castings. They were made by a company called Linker, and I got those many years ago, and I still use them now. This particular theme is with the Little Roadie group of the NMRA, and it's supposed to be the Rhode Island Railroad. They call it the Rhode Island and Old Colony. And my experience on the shoreline going through New Haven, the Amtrak line, it's like a double track line that just cuts a path through the environment. It's straight and it's fast, and it just kind of divides everything in half. And luckily, this is all pre-electric, but this shows some of the building on and some of the painting. And let's go on to more where we can see some things that are fun. Let's see what we have in the next picture. Okay, here's one of the finished modules. That's actually the one that I had. And I started doing this because I had those building kits in the back. I had a lot of little extra parts and extra kits, and I wanted to use them up. The theater, I always wanted to make a theater. When I was in high school, I had the good fortune to work in a movie theater, and I think I worked and turns out to have been a dying breed, the old neighborhood theater where everybody went once a week to see the movie. If you went on Tuesday night, they gave away dishes. And I wanted to kind of make the really decrepit mill towns that surround Providence. I used to take the train from Rhode Island to New York frequently when I was in school. And just about time I was sitting down, you'd be going through these mill towns that they were just kind of hopeless, poor places. And I always kind of liked that. I always kind of liked the squalor, but people live there, and there's the track. I did buy some N-gauge equipment. That was the only New Haven engine I could find. And I found some cars. I made some water. Water I just pour with polyurethane. I do that pretty simply. And if you do any water casting, no matter how tight you think you've made the seal, it always leaks on me. So I always put a newspaper underneath. And I was using super trees. This is the first time I've really used them, and they photograph beautifully. But anyway, this is all N-gauge, and it's kind of fun because I haven't done N-gauge for a long time. I kind of started the hobby as an adult in Engage and migrated to HO to larger scales. And it's fun to do something different, and you can do big things in a small space. By the way, the sky in the back is a real sky. I use Photoshop extensively to do that. It's not the backdrop. If it wasn't for that, you'd be seeing my room. But anyway, let's go on to the next slide. Not sure too much to talk. I wanted to show one construction piece, and I made one of these fireproof, well, factory buildings. Now they look like they're difficult to make, but they're really not. You just get a bunch of styrene strips, and the little inset shows how you just glue strips together. You cut pieces on a chopper or miter saw or table saw, and you just keep gluing them and adding lamination, and you add enough, and you very simply get a building. One nice thing about Engage is you don't need a lot of detail. Some of them have little decorative parts on the panels below the windows. I probably could have taken a pencil and drawn some in, but this is far back and it's small. And don't forget, this is a module, so that would be about 2 feet from the audience in real life. The windows are just printed on acetate. I took a piece of overhead projector, material, and just printed it with my printer. And that's just to figured I'd show you a little construction article. Construction doesn't have to be fast. One thing I like about Engage, and I may offend someone, is I make what I call sketch models. You can make them quickly. They don't need a lot of detail. You can make very large buildings rather than buildings that are very compressed. And it's kind of a whole change from half-inch scale and quarter-inch scale and things like that. And why don't we go on to the next one? Let's see what they have there. Okay, this is part of the mills. This was the last large module I built. I built the more recent one, but the pictures are still in the camera. And this area is known as Onlyville. It's a kind of a suburb of Providence. And what happened was, first of all, at the big picture is my mill. Now, it's called Atlantic Mills. The big gray mill is a bar mill's one kit that I cut up to make an old wooden mill. And if you look at these complexes, they just kind of grew and buildings added to them. And there was a clinic once about unusual mill construction. And I guess what you could take away from them is, if you could think of it, it was built somewhere by somebody. One thing I've always liked, the cutaway buildings. So I have my little cutaway building in the front. It's sort of supposed to be a powerhouse. That's actually a part of an HO gauge kit, but it had the big windows, so I can kind of get away with it. And I didn't have to do the dynamos or anything. But I've always liked the idea of running out of room in the front. I used that last time. I've gotten to use that on just about every layout I've built has something cut away. Now the one on the left is kind of interesting. There really was a Harris Lumber, and that was always my indication. It was a big lumber yard. It's all gone now, and it was all green with yellow signs all over the place. And that was always my indication when we passed that to start getting up and packing up my suitcase and gliding up to get off the train, because the trains, I rode on to New Haven during the last days of New Haven, but even then they stopped, dropped people off, and left in a hurry. It was really quite an elaborate passenger operation, even in its dying years. And it was a fun ride. I've liked riding on the Northeast Corridor, but those are some of the scenes. Now, one thing I did on purpose, I believe that modular railroad is not a good place to do much switching operation, because you're with the public and the public's confusing and there's all sorts of things like that. And also, Engage, I find, is difficult to switch in. It's difficult to uncouple the cars. It's difficult to do things. So I don't know if you can see in the picture, I purposely grew some vehicles across the road and just glued the switch shut, so you don't even have to think about using it. But anyway, though, that's one module. I call that Onlyville. And Onlyville is a real place, but here's a close-up of that. That unfortunately, that module was difficult to photograph, but I scratch built a little bridge in the back, and this is a power canal. See, mills always, the old New England mills, maybe everywhere, used water power at one point, and the canals are still there. So I had a water thing, the plate girder scratch built. Again, that's almost a sketch model too, but that's a finished area. I tend to use lots of foliage. That's that particular module. Now let's see what's next. Okay, this is another module. This one is called Great Swamp. As you go further out of Providence, there's this big swampy area in kind of southern Rhode Island. It's called Great Swamp, and there are some great locations for taking real rail fin photos even today. And I wanted to do something kind of desolate. So there's another water course with a little culvert. I know it's a plastic arch. I believe it's from Atlas. I kind of have saved junk from not quite my childhood, but certainly the time I graduated college. And that was a little piece I liberated. Just kind of made an embankment. The building in the corners of Bar Mills kit. The only engine I found that excuse me, that was leaded from New Haven was that 44 tonner. And I never really planned on running them. So I have that engine. I did get some nice cars. The Katie cars, I guess Katie calls them micro trains. They photograph quite well. And let's see what else we have. I have a feeling I'm going really fast. We ran out of pictures, didn't we?
Yeah.
So I guess I can ad lib for a few minutes. And does anyone have any questions or anything? But I think T-Track's fun. And one thing the Rhode Island group has done that is a nice idea. It's a very portable modular system. Like I joke, it's like carrying around the lunch tray, cafeteria tray, and I eat a lot, so it weighs less than if I went to a cafeteria. And they plug them together on tables, and there's plugs in back. And you can set up a pretty good sized layout in an hour. And they are dependable if you limit yourself to running trains, which is really what the people at the at places want to see. And they'll set them up in various libraries, maybe every couple of months in Rhode Island. And it's usually Saturday morning, and they always get lots of people. Mothers and fathers bring the children, and the libraries put in their events. And it's kind of a nice way to show people model railroading. It's kind of
somebody told me that they were so easy to set up that you could just, pull some tables together and just put them right on top of the tables and hook them up.
Just pop them on top. The connectors on the end, they use that Cato, I think it's called Unitrack. And the plugs on the track hold them together.
Yeah.
And then there's a plug in the back. And it's something that you can set up and be very portable, because you can set this up you can set up a good size layout in an hour or so. And you can rip it down in about 20 minutes. I know many module groups take a whole day or longer to set the modules up. The kits, by the way, there is a T-Track website, okay? And kits are made by different manufacturers. They're becoming more difficult to find. Like I said, the Russians took care of that too,
Well, it's interesting to see it. I've heard about them, and people have told me about them and suggested I try one. I never have, but they seem so easy to transport, not like the old modules that I used to have to lug around. I mean, it took two of us sometimes just to lift the things out of the car or truck.
Well, they come in three sizes. There's like a one. They're basically, now these are nominal measurements. All right. Basically they're a foot deep. There's a 1 foot length, a 2 foot length, and a 3 foot length. So I see you found the webpage. And you could make them in any of the three lengths. And they plug together, and it's the track, it tells you exactly what track to use. Like if you buy the right Cato Unitrack pieces, they plug together. There's a special plug they put in back. And the little roadie group in the NMRA has quite an enormous setup at that. In fact, Little Roadie's funny because it's the Rhode Island division, and one of the nicknames from Rhode Island is Little Roadie. Now it's fitting that Little Roadie has little trains. But interesting, they have another modular group which is O scale, but they don't have an HO one. So I think that's kind of fun.
Mike, from what I saw, the 1 foot ones, it's almost like you're taking on building a diorama.
Well, they are dioramas. You know, I have a 1 foot one. The pictures are in the camera. When I take pictures, I like to leave them for a month or two before I edit them.
Yeah,
Because then I see them kind of fresh. That one was based on, and this is fun, if a recent, and guess I'm plugging a friend, but Bar Mills recently came up with a garage kit. They call it the Downtown Garage. And
yeah.
it's at least a very close copy of one of my favorite buildings from George Selyers's layout. So I got one and then scaled and I built it. And then I had to do something with it. So I built another diorama. That's supposed to be Route 1 in Rhode Island. You know, I lived in Rhode Island for about 5 years. You know, I went to college there and I lived there for most of a year afterwards. And it's a nice, I guess every state is nice, but I like Rhode Island.
Well, thanks so much. It's an interesting concept.
Yeah, it's it's growing more and more. You know, it's an easy thing to do. I don't know when I run out of time, or you'd have to tell me to keep quiet. But one of the people, Steve Erickson, one of the group, he basically does everybody a favor and takes all their modules.
Yeah.
So you don't have to store them in the house. And he sets them up in his basement. And he runs them like a little layout down his basement. You know, and the nice thing about them is I haven't encountered any automobile that's too small to carry one of those.
One of the things that I like about it, you don't have to worry about legs or anything like that. And
No, you just use tables.
yeah, I like.
They have little levelers, and it's there's a whole history in the website about how it was started.
Huh.
You know, I think it was like many things. I think it started in California.
Well, I tell you, next time you're on in 2 weeks, if you think about it, you've got a picture of that little diorama that you built with the Bar Mills kit. I'd love to see it.
Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. Now you give me some incentive. I'll pull it off the camera and I'll mail it to you.
Thanks so much, Mike. I really appreciate it.
So one thing, I'll get off the sec. One thing I like doing is I like leaving pictures for weeks or months before I look at them. That way they're kind of fresh again.
Yeah.
And everything I think is so wonderful is never as good as I remember it. But thank you for having me, Jim.
Thank you so much, Mike. Anybody have any questions for Mike? Mike, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
That either means nobody cared or I spoke really well. I said
you covered it so well.
Well, I don't know. It's a small subject to cover. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Mike. See you in 2 weeks.
Thank you too, Jim. Take care of yourself.
Yes, sir.